Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to a video on what I think is the greatest war film of all time, Elin Klimov's 1985 Come and See. I think there's kind of 2 points in a film fan's life, or 2 eras: the time before you saw Come and See and the time after you saw Come and See. Come and See is a film from 1985, set in Belarus, and I came across it in film books because it was always cited as being a great film, but strangely enough you couldn't really get a hold of it. As far as I'm aware, it's never been on British network television, but of course every other war film is on, in the afternoon, at the weekend, all the time, full of stars and heroes. As a race, we have an unusual relationship with war and war films. War is one of the few things that we seem to keep doing, and we never seem to learn from them. And we keep making war films too. The general feeling, as you all know, is that war is a terrible thing, but war films tend to say that, but then at the same time they love heroes, they love fetishizing weaponry. They love explosions and shootouts, and, like I say, acts of heroism, and a bit of flag waving and a bit of jingoism. But by the way, war's actually quite bad, even though we kind of enjoy it as well. Come and See completely obliterates that. If you know somebody who thinks that Saving Private Ryan is the greatest war film of all time, you need to strap them to a chair and watch Come and See. For better or for worse, once you've seen Come and See, your Saturday afternoon war film matinees just seem rather pointless. Come and See is an amazing piece of filmmaking, but it's also one of the hardest films to watch. It is harrowing. It does take a strong stomach, because once you've seen it, even once, years later, you still will have images from the film in your head or in your dreams. So that's always been rumoured that Criterion might actually release it. This is a fairly good print on double disc DVD, which also has an interview with Klimov and Alexei Kravchenko, who's 15 years old. He plays the lead character Floria. Klimov himself was actually born in Stalingrad, and he actually lived through the bombings, and his mother and siblings escaped Stalingrad. So he always had this image of, doing a war film in his head to try and capture, as he puts it, that hell that they went through. Klimov never directed a film after this. He's still alive, he's 70 now, but he never directed a film after this. Kravchenko went on to have a long career. He's still acting today, but he didn't make a film for 10 years after this, and you can see why. It was originally going to be called Kill Hitler, but after a while they came to the title Come and See, which is a reference from the Book of Revelations, because this film is essentially a descent into hell. It starts Belarus, 1943. Floria and his pal are digging for guns in the beach so they can join the militia to help fight the Germans. And again, it's your typical, this is going to be a big adventure, and wide-eyed youth and full of excitement. He wears this ill-fitting suit and a big cloth cap that's kind of comical. So he gets kind of enlisted or dragged along, and he leaves his mother and his two twin sisters, and they go to the forest where all the partisans kind of sing songs, and there's a vaguely funny bit of humour when they're all trying to pose for this huge photograph of the whole group. And there he meets Glasha, who's a similarly aged girl who has obviously had relations with the commander. So the partisans all go off, and Floria gets left behind because he's the new boy, and he and Glasha kind of hang out with each other, and then bombs drop in the forests. So it's okay, there are at least 4 explosions in this film for all you warhounds. And it's at this point that you get the relationship between war and nature, which Terrence Malick would kind of speak to in Thin Red Line, which I think's actually the second best war film of all time. But Klimov shows this 13 years before Malick. Floria tramples a nest of eggs. There's a stork that comes out of the forest after the bombing. Cows get strafed with bullets. The forest, the bogs, nature kind of plays a part as it's destroyed, as well as man. I'm sorry, but this review is probably going to be a bit downbeat, because there's not a lot of light moments, and again there's no heroes to brighten your mood. There's no act of sacrifice, and so there's a bright Klimov, disorientates us, even if I can actually speak. It's so powerful you'll lose all form of language. And Floria is partially deaf or temporarily deaf, and we hear that, and there's a ringing in the soundtrack. And the two of them, Floria and Glasha, end up going back to his village to try and find his mother and his sisters, who aren't there. And they try to have something to eat, but there's a lot of flies about. And there's a beautiful shot of the dolls on the floor, covered in flies also. And again, there's just images that you see out the corner of your eye that stick with you for the rest of your life. And as they're leaving the village, Floria is convinced that they've kind of crossed this boggy area and hidden in the bogs to get away from the Germans. But Glasha kind of knows better. And so they get to the bogs, and there's a bunch of women and children and old people hiding there. And they tell Floria what's happened to his family. Again, he's still ringing in his ears. He can't hear properly. There's a point where he tries to bury his head in the bog. Again, if the Oscars had some integrity, Alexei Kravchenko would have won the best actor, because he literally goes through hell, and we see it in his face as he goes from this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready for adventure young man, and becomes an old man within the space of a few days. And the camera's unflinching. You just kind of have extreme close-ups of his face, and he's just staring at you from the screen. And it is quite moving, as he is literally put through the ringer. So when they get to the bog, they construct a fake Hitler. They run about with this and try and plant it somewhere. The scenes where they're trying to steal cattle and trying to steal supplies for the people on the bog island. I mean, the film doesn't really have a plot particularly. It is just following Floria and Glasha to a certain extent through these just hellish tableaus. Stylistically, the film, it's not beautifully composed. It's rough around the edges. There's a lot of handheld, but then there's also kind of gliding cameras at times that are distancing themselves. They're kind of a silent observer, as we are, and they're kind of helpless. They can't help, as in that's what the definition of helpless is. They can't actually help the people that are suffering in the film the same way we can't help them. And then the film kind of ends with this extended, essentially annihilation of a village. The Germans don't actually appear in the film until 87 minutes in. It's about 2 hours and a quarter. It can seem longer than that for some people. I can understand why, if people don't actually like it. I'm sure I've read, I think if you look at it in Amazon, there will be a pile of 5-star reviews, and there'll also be a pile of 1-star reviews, and nothing else in the middle. And a lot of the 1-star reviews will actually say, this was a horrible film and I didn't enjoy it and it wasn't entertaining. It's about the essentially destruction of 626 villages in Belarus in 1943. The Germans systematically just wiped out village after village after village, and strangely enough, it's not entertaining. It's not a film for popcorn. Anyway, and so this is essentially a destruction of a village, which is really difficult to watch, which is kind of the point. And again, the idea of nature, one of the German officers has like a little bush baby on his shoulder. I mean, it's just little touches like that. And somehow Floria gets away from that. I'm not going to go into detail. That is quite horrific. And we find out what happened to Glasha, which is one of the most horrific scenes you'll ever like to see, as she staggers out of the mist. Yeah, I'm not going to say. You literally have to come and see. And then, one of the criticisms of the film is that the Germans are portrayed, they're a bit cartoonish, and they're just portrayed as pure evil, and there's not a lot of balance or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, this happened. 626 villages were just annihilated. 1 in every 4 Belarusians were killed. But there is a scene where the Russians catch up with some of the Germans responsible for the destruction of the village, and they are shown to do just as horrific things to the Germans. So it's not as if the Russians are portrayed as heroes, because this isn't a film for heroes. And then, it might be a spoiler, but if you're up to this far and you don't mind being spoiled, because you need to come and see. Klimov asks that question that's always been asked. It's that kind of philosophical question. It's almost like Schrodinger's cat, of if you could, would you kill Hitler, but Hitler is a baby? And that kind of question, or that kind of quandary, is given to Floria at the end of the film. And again, we just see a close-up of his face, which is wrinkled and world-weary and just destroyed by this experience. I know I'm maybe not selling the film as something that you would actually want to see. There is, just for like an added layer of horror, Klimov near the end kind of inserts newsreel footage of concentration camps as well, just to add a bit more horror to it. So again, I understand if people don't want to watch this film, but this film should be seen, and it should be known more widely, because I don't think it's actually known that well outside of film fans. Again, like I said, as far as I'm aware, it's never been on British television. Whereas you'll see the Green Berets on a Saturday afternoon. Now, there are, in my kind of, I haven't done a top 10 war films, but certainly there will be films that perhaps don't glorify war or do much flag waving. Like I said, The Thin Red Line is probably my second favourite war film, and then probably Paths of Glory. and then How I Won the War, perhaps, which is an anti-war film. But Come and See is a stunning piece of work. I think the first time I saw it, I was in tears after it, just because it is so overwhelming. And watching it again recently for this video, I did find myself, when I watched the interviews with Alexei Kravchenko, I was actually tearing up just because I remember what that poor boy went through. It literally is a descent into hell, but unlike your average war film, there's no kind of redemption at the end. There's no heroism at the end. Nobody gets any medals. It's a challenging, harrowing, difficult film, but it's a film that is essential, and hopefully one day Criterion might actually release it, and hopefully get a wider audience. So thank you very much for watching, and thank you if you made it to the end. Let me know what you think of Come and See if you've seen it, but I won't hold it against you if you don't want to watch it. This is Solitary Ronin saying have a good evening after that horrific video, and hopefully we'll see you again. Solitary Ronin saying cheerio.